So, everything counts, and everything that you do affects this positioning. You see, if you have a great positioning so that people think and talk about you in a positive way, then whenever you call them, say, oh, I'll take his call, or her call, and I got something I want to talk to you about. Good, and they'll see you more readily, they'll buy from you. Here's a good example. Is there anybody here who has a customer that buys from you without asking the price? I mean, after they've bought from you, they buy again, and they don't ask the price. You have customers like that? They just say, yes, I need some more? Say yes. Well, is it because they don't care about the price? Why is it that they would buy without asking the price a second time? It's because your position is such that the prices that you charge will be the right prices. They will be fair prices. They will be reasonable prices. They will be honest prices. Isn't that true? So they don't need to ask the price. It's like if you go to a restaurant, you don't need to ask, well, how much is every single, bit of fried rice? How much do I get? So in other words, once they trust you, and this brings us to the relationship selling model, and we say that there's two models of selling. There's the old model of selling, which is how I was brought up, and then there's the new model of selling. Now, the old model of selling had 4 parts. The 4 parts, the first part of the old model of selling was establishing rapport. We're talking about, but it was very quick. Hi, how are you? And immediately start talking about your product or service. There are still a lot of salespeople who sell like this. They don't take any time to get to know and understand the customer. The second 20% of the old model was qualifying. We'd find out if they had, how much money they had before we would spend any time with them. The third part of the old model, 30%, was presenting, and this is where you used every trick possible to talk them out of the money you determined that they had in stage number 2. And the last 40% of the old model of selling was closing, and all the emphasis was on closing the customer to get them to buy. In the 70s, the market began to shift. As people became smarter and better educated, as the market became more competitive, the market shifted and it went through a transition to the new model of selling. Now, the new model of selling has 4 parts as well. The first 40% of the new model of selling is building trust. Now, we call this the relationship selling model. And if you can build enough trust, everything else will take care of itself. If you can't, nothing else will work, not even low prices. You know and I know that building trust is the key to all relationships. The most important people in your life are the people you trust. The most important people in your work life, family life. The most important part of relationships is to be able to trust people. Absolutely. And so trust is what starts a relationship. So the way that you build trust in sales is you ask questions about people's needs. Now, the interesting thing is, the more you ask questions about what the person really needs, what they are doing now, how it's working, and listen to the answers, the more they trust you. And the more they trust you, the more they give you information about what they need. And the more they give you information, and the more you listen, the more they trust you. And eventually the customer will reach a point where they feel so comfortable with you that they will tell you everything that you need to know to help them, or to tell them that this is not a good product for them. They know that you will never sell them something that they don't need. You're a professional. So when you ask questions about their needs, you position yourself as a consultant. When you listen closely to the answers, you tell them that you really care for them. So you simultaneously build the 2 parts of the golden triangle, relationship selling and consultative selling. The third part of the new model of selling, this is 30, identifying needs is 30%. The third part, 20%, is presenting. And presenting is where you show the prospect exactly how your product or service will satisfy the person's needs. You show them how, and what we have found by watching the thousands of videotapes is that top salespeople have the ability to match products and services much better than average salespeople. In other words, when they sell, they only talk about what the customer has said is important. They don't talk about everything. They don't talk about everything they like. They listen carefully to what the prospect has said, and then they say, well, based on what you've said, our product or service will do this. Have you ever had an experience where you've gone to a store and the person said, can I help you? And you said, yes, I'm looking for this. And they said, yes, okay, follow me. And they take you and they show you something that is not at all what you said. Have you had this experience? You want to whack them right in the back of the head. Because it means they don't care about me. They weren't listening. They're wasting my time. But then you've had the other experience. The other experience is where you go to the store and you tell the person what you're looking for, and they say, did you want this or this? Well, this. I think we've got something. Come with me. And they take you, and there it is, and it's exactly what you described. The sale has been made, hasn't it? I mean, you've literally decided to buy because they've matched so closely what you said. So here's a rule in psychology. It is that people don't argue with their own information. They will argue with your information, but they won't argue with their own information. So therefore, if you show them that this is what they said and your product or service is exactly what they said, the sale has almost been made. Because people have, it has been identified in psychology as what is called consistency. Human beings have an intense inner desire to remain consistent with what they said. Have you ever had your kids say, Daddy, you said? But you just said, remember you said? Have you ever heard this? You don't remember saying it, but you feel compelled to do whatever it was because they told you that you said it. When a person says, this is what we need, this is what we want, this is our problems, and you say, well, our product will do this and it will do that and we'll solve that problem, people try to remain consistent with what they said. They don't argue with their own information. So therefore, really good salespeople make sure that their presentation fits like a hand in a glove into what the customer says they want. Oh, damn, this is good. All right. The last part, the last 10%, is confirming. Does this make sense to you? Do you like this? Is this what you're looking for? Until the customer says, yes, that makes sense, and then you can go on to close the sale. Now, let me give you the simplest of all closing techniques. It's called the invitational close, is where you simply say, well, if you like it, why don't you give it a try? Why don't you take it? Why don't you buy it? Or if you're selling services, say, well, if this makes sense to you, why don't you give us a try? The invitational close, why don't you give it a try, is a simple, powerful closing technique, one of the most powerful ever developed for a customer who's reached the end of the sales presentation. Do you like this so far? Yes, well, why don't you take it? I was speaking to a salesman in New York last week. He said, you know, that doubled my income. He said, it's my favorite closing technique. And he's a very successful guy. And double his income is a lot of money. He said, I'll double it again next year. He said, every single time I talk to a prospect, I present it, I ask any questions, I say, you have any questions? The person says, no. He says, why don't you take it? He said, it's amazing. They say, okay. So always, at the end of a sales conversation, invite the person to buy. Even if they say, well, I don't know, I'm not sure, let me think it over. You say, look, why don't you just take it? Okay. It's the most amazing darn thing. Look, you need it. You're going to get it sooner or later. This is a good price. We stand behind it. Why don't you just take it? Okay. It solves the problem. Remember, a product or service that a person needs solves the problem if you can sell it to them. Why don't you give it a try? Even if they're taking you by the neck and throwing you out into the street, say, why don't you take it? And often they say, oh, bring them back. We'll take it. You know. So always, never leave a sales conversation. I used to come to the end of a sales talk, and I would be very enthused, and I've got the appointment, I've made the presentation, and everything else, and then I say, well, what do you think? You ever done that? Well, what do you think? The person says, well, I think I'd like to think it over. Which means goodbye forever. We'll never meet again. Okay, so this is the new model, and the new model is the relationship selling model, and here's the rule. Listening builds trust. Listening builds trust. And trust is the key to sales success in the 21st century. Your job is to build one trust relationship after another. Because even if they don't buy from you today, if the trust relationship has been established and you keep in touch with them, remember, salespeople, top salespeople are optimists. They make more calls, they call back more often. It may be the person can't buy today, but they will buy next week, next month. Trust is the critical factor. I got a ride to the airport by this salesman in Atlanta, Georgia, and brand new Mercedes. And he was taking me to the airport, and he said, how do you like my car? I said, it's beautiful. And he said, you want to know how I got it? I said, sure. He said, well, I listened to your material year after year, especially that part about persistence and continuing to call back. I called on this major Fortune 500 company, and we sell telecommunication services, wireless, telephone, fiber optics, satellite communications, and this is a major company. This company is spending $3 million a year on our services with our competitor. So I called on him and I made a presentation. And he said, really liked it, looks good. He said, but you know, we've been with this other company for many years and we're quite happy with this other company. We really don't need your services. I mean, I really enjoy looking at this. I like to keep informed about what's going on in the industry, but we're going to stay with our existing supplier. He said, well, that's fine. He said, but I'd like to keep in touch with you and keep you informed on what's going on in this industry because there's so many changes taking place that you should know what's going on. He said, well, that's fine. I like to keep informed. He said, if you want to keep in touch with me, that's fine. He said, but we're not changing. We're happy with our existing supplier. So he, once a month, would call back on this major decision maker. And he would bring in new information. And they would have a cup of coffee, spend 15, 20 minutes. And he said, is there anything I can do to help you? He said, no, we're fine. Everything's going fine. About 6 months after this started, going every month, he said, Bill, he said, you know, I really appreciate you dropping in each month and keeping me informed and everything else. He said, but, you know, we're really happy with the people we're dealing with. How long are you going to continue calling back on me? He said, until one of us dies. He said, you're really serious, aren't you? He said, yes, I am. He said, because this industry is changing so rapidly that there will come a time where we will have something that nobody else will have. We will be able to service you better than your existing supplier. He said, well, you know, if you're willing to spend the time, you go ahead. He called on him every month for a whole year. At the end of the year, their existing supplier put in a rate increase and didn't tell anybody. And in the United States, if you put in a rate increase, all you have to do is publish it somewhere in some newspaper. Nobody has to see it. But then you can say, you see, you published it, it was public. And the next year it was a 22% rate increase. He saw it on the bill. The first time he saw it, it came up on the bill. It made him so mad, he called him in. He said, come here, we're going to give you the whole account. He said his commission for the first sale, the first year, was $186,000 US. And he said he bought a brand new Mercedes with it. So, until one of us dies. All right, listening builds trust. But the key is, once you've built the trust, keep the plate spinning. Just keep the relationship going. Remember, things are changing. Sometimes the biggest sale you'll make will take a year or 2 years before it comes together, and it'll be so big. I had one gentleman make one sale as a result of using some of these principles. He said he made one sale that was 68% of his entire year's quota in one sale, because it was solely based on building trust and maintaining that trust. So here are the 4 keys to listening. Number 1, listen attentively. Listen closely. Listen without interrupting. This is what tells the person that you care about them. Listen attentively. Lean forward. Nod. Smile. Pay close attention. And don't interrupt. Just listening closely to people causes them to feel better about themselves and like you more, and they like themselves more. Number 2 is pause before replying. Just pause. Allow for silence. Don't feel that you have to jump in. Just say, nod, smile, That's an interesting point. And number 3 is question. We say question for clarification. And the very best question you'll ever learn in selling, and I've had many people say that this one question has been worth everything to them, is the question, how do you mean? How do you mean? We can't afford it. How do you mean? Business is bad. How do you mean? We're happy with our existing supplier. How do you mean? We're not in the market right now. How do you mean? I don't like you. I don't like your company. I don't like your industry. And quite frankly, I'm not interested in doing business with you. How do you mean exactly? Here's the point. How do you mean is a control question. But it's also an invisible control question. An invisible control question is one that you can ask over and over again, and the person will always answer it. And they will always expand on what they said. You say, we can't afford. How do you mean? Well, our business has been a bit slow lately. Well, how do you mean exactly? Well, we're down from the third quarter sales. Well, how do you mean? Well, we expected our sales to be this in the third quarter. In other words, every time you say, how do you mean, it opens up. But it's invisible because the question is never heard, only the answer. And as they give you the answer, very often you can see an opportunity to make the sale. You can see an opportunity to answer the objection and make the sale. So keep asking, how do you mean? How do you mean? And here's the rule, is the person who asks questions has control. The person who asks questions has control. The person answering the questions is controlled by the questioner. If you're in a sales conversation and they ask you a question, they're in danger. You're in danger of having them take control. Because as soon as you start answering, you are basically, they're becoming the marionette and you're the puppet. Okay? So when a person asks you a question, what do? You say, that's a good question. Let me ask you something. And you ask your own question and take control. That's a good question, but let me ask you something. How do you mean exactly? Or what are you doing in this area? Or how is that working for you? Or when would you be thinking of making a decision if you found exactly what you were looking for? It doesn't matter what your question is, take control. The person who asks questions has control. By the way, I'm speaking primarily to the men here because the women all know this. Women are brilliant at controlling conversations with questions. Oh, they're so dangerous. I have 2 daughters, 22 and 10, and there's a stage in a woman's life where they're taken away by other women to a cave in the mountain, and they're taught how to control men for the rest of their lives. And ever after, they can control you with words and questions. For instance, you ask them something, they say nothing. They know that if they answer, you've taken control, so they won't respond. It's very unnerving for men. Now, they also, if you get into an argument with them, they fight back with. You saw a crouching tiger fight with a sword. They fight back with questions. And by the time you're finished, you were in the right when you started, and you're in the wrong now. Women know that they can control a little 100-pound woman can control a 200-pound man with questions. They can control him with questions so powerfully, they can control him with one-word questions. Oh? They can control him with nonverbal questions. He's across a crowded room talking to another woman, and she goes... It's like an icicle through the heart. So, the person who asks questions has what? Has control. So it's really important. And when you ask questions, you get a chance to listen. And listening builds trust. And trust is the key to effective selling. Are you with me so far? So therefore, the last part of questioning is feed it back. Feed it back in your own words. Just say, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. This is what consultants do. Instead of jumping in and responding, say, let me make sure I understand what you just said. This is what you're doing now. These are your plans for the next couple of years. These are your concerns, and this is what you're looking for. The very fact that you feed it back exactly the way they said it causes them to suddenly see you totally differently. They trust you completely. And if you feed it back accurately, they assume you have the proper solution. They are 80-90% sold by the very fact that you fed it back to them accurately what they said. It's like if you go into a store and you say, I'm looking for this. And you say, you're looking for this and this and this? You say, yeah, good, I think we have that. You go and buy it because they were able to feed it back so accurately. So relationship selling, consultative selling means to focus on the customer's needs. Keep asking the customer about what he or she is doing. How is it working? There's a direct relationship between questions and sales success. The more questions you ask, the more likely it is you'll make the sale. And the person who asks questions has control. And when you ask questions, you get a chance to listen. And listening builds trust. So these are the critical parts of psychological selling. Now here's the final point. Is the great uneasiness that we have in selling is because of the fear of failure and the fear of rejection. It's fear of rejection more than anything else that holds salespeople back. Fear of being told, no, I'm not interested, I don't want it, and so on. However, when you position yourself as a relationship builder, when you position yourself as a consultant, when you position yourself as a teacher, and you focus on asking questions and listening closely to the answers, and then helping customers get what they want with what you sell, all the stress goes out of the sales conversation, both for you and for the customer. And selling becomes a joyous thing. You become happy about it. And if you then make a decision, I'm not going to spend any time with difficult people. I'm not going to spend any more time with them. I'm going to introduce them to each other and let them go off and ruin each other's lives. If you make a decision that from now on you're going to spend time with people that you like, and you're going to treat them well, and you're going to ask them good questions and listen carefully to the answers and try to help them get more products and services, and buy your products and services, and if business is slow, you're just going to work a little bit harder, and you're going to start a little bit earlier and work a little bit harder and stay a little bit later. And if you make that decision, and you make the decision that you're going to be in the top 10% in your field, and you work at it every day, and the only question you ask is what? How? If the only question you ask is how, with regard to your future dreams and your goals and becoming the best in your field and achieving your sales goals, you keep yourself optimistic all the time, you keep yourself positive, you keep yourself happy, and at the end of the day you can say with all sincerity, I like myself. Say, I like myself. Thank you very much. God bless you.